Good morning, Sacramento. Thanks for joining us. My name is Craig Ashton. Yes, and the show is called All Things Legal. This is where personal injury attorneys distill topical events into their legal essence. Why do we do that? Well, we're personal injury attorneys by trade, but we're curious by nature. So ultimately what we do is we distill topical events and kind of look them through the prism of a legal lens. This morning I'm joined by my colleague, friend, and fast-pitch baseball player, Tim Hodson.
Good morning. Good to be here.
And bon vivant, all-around Renaissance man, world traveler, Edward Shady. This is the one time you want a shady attorney on your side.
I like that intro, actually, so keep that one.
All right, so we've been gallivanting a bit about Spain, Barcelona, Mallorca, Cadaqués, Girona, and I had the bad fortune of having missed my flight and had to basically have an overnight in Paris. That was a bummer.
What a shame.
So now we're back live, and hopefully that brings warmness to your heart. If not, if you don't like the show, get somebody you don't like, make them listen and ruin their hour for the next, or at least next 55 minutes. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the Golden One Center and the fact that there was not a traffic jam, a rama downtown when Paul McCartney played. We'll talk about the California Environmental Quality Act, and we'll talk about how well that went quickly. We'll talk about Colin Kaepernick actually getting into a dispute with a Supreme Court Justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. They call her Notorious RBG. She's 5 foot tall, 83, and she's having a war of words with Colin Kaepernick. Who knew that Colin Kaepernick's biggest fight this year would not be against the Cowboys, but against Notorious RBG? All right, then we'll go ahead and talk about a $15 million settlement. This is important. A little girl died at Camp Sacramento as a result of being exposed to peanuts, and she went into anaphylactic shock. Her father was there, happened to be a surgeon, and administered 3 EpiPens, and she died in his arms and in her mother's arms. Super tragic, $15 million settlement. We'll talk about how that occurred, the legal issues pertaining to that resolution, and how it's really important to have awareness about allergies. Roger Dreyer is the attorney. He's a great lawyer, Dreyer, Babich, and McCullough, one of the best firms in the country. We'd like to think that we can be considered in the same sentence as them, but those guys definitely know what they're doing. And ultimately what he said is that food allergies are not an inconvenience. They can be life-ending. So I think this is a good time to have some legal issues addressed, but also bring some awareness to this. Then we're going to go from that which is very important to that which is surprisingly difficult to deal with, which is the statements by Donald Trump about taking Tic Tacs and kissing girls not even waiting, and then grabbing their genitalia. We'll talk about Billy Bush. Looks like he's being fired. We'll talk about the contract. We'll talk about right to privacy. We'll talk about Donald Trump now threatening to sue the New York Times as a result of 3 women who've come forward, said in fact not only did he talk about these things, but he actually did these things. And we'll talk about defamation and New York Times v. Sullivan and reckless disregard for the truth and whether or not that particular cause of action would have a leg to stand on. And then there's a troubling new study that indicates that there's a 10% increase in teen driving deaths last year. We'll talk about how that's happening and ultimately what we can do to prevent that. So let's go ahead and get started. So I don't know if you recall, but when we started the show about 3 years ago, there was the Kings were about ready to be sold to Chris Hansen.
They were gone, yeah.
As I say, not the Chris Hansen from To Catch a Predator, but the guy who is an investment banker from San Francisco. Going to move him to Seattle. David Stern said, no, that's not going to happen because you are a franchisee. There's a contract. You can only do what's in the best interest of the NBA, just like Taco Bell can't start serving Big Macs because they're a franchisee. So ultimately, there was some machinations went back and forth. Vivek Ranadive got involved. Then there were Sacramento taxpayers opposed to pork. They tried to stop the purchase of the team or the finance of the team through Sacramento. That was stopped. And there was a California Environmental Quality Act. And there was some election law issues. And then there was the Fifth Amendment and the taking clause and eminent domain. So we got all through those things, and one of the reasons that there was some trepidation about putting the arena downtown is because of traffic. Tim, you were here. I mean, I was in Spain when this happened, but I read the articles. I mean, it turned out that there wasn't really – it turned out to work pretty smoothly.
Yeah, it seems like the people in charge know what they're doing. From all accounts, the garages went smoothly. A lot of people were had trepidation about using the parking garages because it would take forever to get out, but it was all prepaid, and they just opened the gates when the concert was over. RT ran smoothly. It actually ran a little bit early, which was kind of one of the only real problems they had. They didn't expect the concert to go as long as it did. But there weren't really any real issues. I mean, a few ADA complaints were that the ADA drop-off was a block too far from the arena, but it also sounded like, cops weren't really being too aggressive outside. People were getting dropped off in front of the arena, stopping traffic, etc. It seemed like it was pretty free-flowing, and they were right that most of the traffic would happen after rush hour, which it did. So from all accounts, I mean, for a first-time event in downtown Sacramento, it went pretty smoothly traffic-wise.
Yeah, the moral of the story when I read this, because we've been talking about this, about a month ago, is that they have a command center where they can have real time determine where the traffic is, change the lighting sequences. You can book your parking space in advance. And the cool thing was people were afraid to park in the parking areas, but because they paid in advance, they just put the arm up and you didn't have to check out, and then traffic moves smoothly.
You're out, yeah.
You know what? I mean, because this could have gone, because we have been kind of supporters of this. I talked about my brother lived in Shanghai maybe 20 years ago. It was a bunch of cattle pastures, and now it's this massive city. You look at what happened in South of Market in San Francisco when I grew up.
Park.
That was kind of like, where I was into a flock of seagulls and that kind of thing. So back in the 80s. So, I mean, you would go out there and there would be dance clubs, and it would be more of a kind of seedier, had a little bit more San Francisco flavor to it. And then once you put in AT&T Park, that whole area has changed dramatically.
Yeah, it's huge.
So I have always been, because I've lived in different places, we have always been purveyors that this is a very good idea, and we broke down the legal issues, but there could have, it could have gone really wrong. I mean, if you have these massive traffic jams, nobody can get there, everybody's unhappy. So far that didn't happen. So to their credit, they've done a great job helping people manage traffic. Apparently there's people that were working for RT. One of the lawyers was out.
Yeah, I'm curious to know which the lawyer that is, because we deal with RT a lot, so I'm curious
You
as to
gotta
who it
love
was.
that.
I wonder if it was Melissa or Tim.
Or Tim, yeah. I'm sure it was Tim. I'm going to ask him next time I see him. But yeah, I was curious when I read that as well.
And then they're offering free light rail to anybody for the whole season. If you have a Kings ticket,
Right.
Free light rail, which I think is great. Because just coming back from Spain, essentially what you do, I mean, Ed, you took light rail almost everywhere. I walked miles and miles and because it's beautiful to walk. And Sacramento's flat, just like Barcelona is flat. And it is really walking friendly. So you can take the RT, you can walk to the game. It's environmentally friendly. You get to hang out with people. You don't have to worry about DUIs. And it's a much better experience.
The one thing that surprised me, though, is they said they only had about 100 people actually bike to the game, which to me in Sacramento, that was surprising. I thought it would be a much higher number.
Well, Ed and I, we can just ride from Folsom down there.
I mean, there's always
thank
bikes
you.
downtown. There's always people on bikes in downtown and midtown. So that was a low number to me.
The only problem with Sacramento, because it is flat, but there's not a lot of bike friendly streets.
You would know.
I
yeah.
took the bike trail down, and then I ended up with my bike. It's my fault, but I mean, I ended up on light rail going the same direction, and my wheel got caught, and I went down. And fortunately, there was a super nice guy to help me up before the train came, and Paulie purebreded me. So the moral of the story is that I think we can do more with biking. I think we're doing a better job there, but the fact that they were able to get through the California Environmental Quality Act, because it was a infill project, it got expedited to Darrell Steinberg's credit, who's now going to be the new mayor of Sacramento, and the traffic worked right on. That just tells me, I just see these people as super switched on, and when you have switched on leaders, you have good experiences. And I'm very happy that worked so far.
Me too, because that's the one thing I was critical of was the traffic around, getting in and out of the WX. But like you said, they know what they're doing apparently so far. Let's hope it continues.
And they had the benefit of other cities actually having gone through this first. They go and look at models of what occurred and what to avoid. So, hats off to them. The city and our officials finally got something straight. It looks like they did a great job. So,
yeah, right on.
Applause.
So that is basically makes me feel good about the fact that we have been supporters for this for a while, because it could have gone the wrong direction, and it could have been a nightmare. And if nobody likes traffic. I mean, traffic is not fun,
Especially not me.
All right, so we're about ready to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about the unlikely. Basically gamesmanship between Colin Kaepernick and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, talking about his protest and taking a knee during the national anthem, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg basically saying he's stupid and dumb for doing it. And we'll talk about that after the break. This is Craig Ashton. The show is All Things Legal.
Right from the night I first saw you.
Muchas gracias, G. That was a good song. All right, so that's giving me pleasant memories of my recent sojourn into Catalonia with my beautiful girlfriend Tanya, who speaks Spanish, which when you're an exuberant individual like I am, who tends to wear bow ties and ascots, Having somebody who speaks Spanish tends to keep you out of trouble, so Tanya, thank you very much for that. All right, so if you're just joining the show, this is All Things Legal. My name is Craig Ashton. This is where personal injury attorneys distill topical events into the legal essence because we are curious. I'm joined by Tim Hodson, Edward Shady, two unbelievably well-versed personal injury attorneys who also like to read and give a very unique perspective. So before we took the break, we were breaking down the fact that we were going to discuss Colin Kaepernick, who, to his credit, he's taken a risk, and he's taken a knee during the national anthem and trying to make a statement about what he considers to be inappropriate interaction between people of color and law enforcement.
And he started a national conversation, too. I mean, he did.
Whether or not during the national anthem, which celebrates the United States of America, has nothing to do with law enforcement. Bottom line, he's getting a point across, and the First Amendment protects that. And there's no way that the 49ers are going to exercise a contractual right to terminate him, to say, when you're making a statement like this, you're breaking your morality clause, because we'll talk about that with Billy Bush when we come up to it. So, he's well within his probably contractual rights and certainly within his First Amendment rights to do that. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and if you don't know who she is, she's one of 8 Supreme Court justices. We're supposed to have 9, but as it stands, Justice Scalia passed away, and the legislative branch is not allowing a vote up or down on a new justice until a new president is elected. So we've got 8 justices, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg is one of them. She's 5 foot tall. I think she's 83 years old, and she's taking on Colin Kaepernick.
And she's the current world reigning champ.
So they call her Notorious RBG because she's very progressive, and she... There was a case called Shelby County v. Holder, which essentially in the South, there's certain states, not only in the South, that have been recognized as states that have inherently discriminated against people of color during voting. And so there was a preemptive block to any changes that they could make. They had to get federal approval to do it. Shelby County v. Holder changed that and allowed them to make up their own voting rules without oversight from the federal government. So Notorious RBG wrote, throwing out preclearance when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. So that's the flourish that she has from a verbal perspective. And so she basically said of Colin Kaepernick, based upon taking a knee, if they want to be stupid, there's no law that should be preventative. If they want to be arrogant, there's no law that prevents them from that. So Colin Kaepernick said, it's disappointing to hear a Supreme Court justice call a protest against injustices and oppression stupid, dumb, in reference to the players doing that. So who knew that Colin Kaepernick would be getting into a verbal joust with Notorious RBG?
I'll take my odds with RBG on this one.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because she is very liberal, especially in a lot of her decisions and her dissents. But her past is more, Martin Luther King-esque when it comes to these type of protests, where Colin Kaepernick is clearly more Malcolm X in his approach, and I think that's where they're rubbing.
Yeah, she's more the passive approach instead of head-on and in your face.
Right. My personal feeling from a perspective where you have to have an independent judiciary that's supposed to be not connected to what's going on culturally, because you really want them to be impartial. When she stepped in and started criticizing Donald Trump, I thought, she stepped way over the boundaries there. I mean, there's a presidential election going on. She's part of a separate branch of the judiciary, and she's commenting on Trump. And I don't know why she feels like she needs to say these things. I think it kind of degrades a little bit of the gravitas of the Supreme Court when they engage a guy like Colin Kaepernick, because he's a quarterback for the 49ers.
Right.
And then, calling him stupid or dumb or arrogant. I don't see how that helps, because our system's fragile right now.
She should not weigh in on social issues that could potentially come in front of the Supreme Court at a later date, because then she's prejudged something before it even reaches her, and it's completely improper. She might even have to recuse herself if something like this came before her.
Well, I agree with you. I didn't even think about that, honestly, when I was reading this article, but I agree with you guys 100%. I mean, you're completely right about that.
Yeah, so the moral of the story is that you're seeing, and today the king of Thailand died. And
88 years on the throne, I think it was.
Yeah, and so having spent some time in Thailand, and my brother has a place in Thailand, and Thailand's a beautiful country, but they have a very fragile system. And every maybe 5 or 6 years, the military takes over. And they're a relatively benign military, but their constitutional monarchy basically falls apart every 5 or 10 years. And the reason is that there is not a firm system in place to separate out the powers. The military basically is the strongest power, and they stay on the sidelines until they see something they don't like. And the only one that was able to keep them in check was really the king. In Thailand, I think a Dutch tourist drew a mustache on the king's picture, and I think he got 5 years in prison for that. So they take that very seriously. So the point is that there are systems that are fragile, and in ours, it's been around for over 200 years, but it's fragile. And what's going on in the presidential campaign shows the fragility of it, where we've got now insults about the size of somebody's genitalia. We've got perhaps sexual assault being bandied about. Little Marco, low energy Jeb, crooked Hillary, bringing people that are accused the former president of rape to a debate. I mean, we've devolved into a less than intellectual discourse, and the things that hold this whole thing together is that we have a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judiciary that's supposed to be impartial. And the Supreme Court is the highest level of that, where intellectualism still must be the word of the day. And when Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who I respect, starts wading in to calling Donald Trump names or wading in to debate a quarterback for the 49ers and talking about arrogance and stupidity, man, you got to stay away. In my opinion, you stay away from that stuff, because the mystique of the impartial judicial branch is got to remain intact, because you lose that. And Donald Trump started going when he's called Judge Curiel,
right?
Said who was born in Indiana because he's of Mexican heritage, he's not fit to judge him. That really irritated me, because you know what? This is our country. And this is a country based upon a constitution that's very, very important. Some super smart people figured it out. And a guy like Donald Trump, he may be a great businessman or whatever he does. Maybe he's great on The Apprentice, but that guy is not Thomas Jefferson. And the fact that he's attacking that system from a legal perspective, and now Ruth Bader Ginsburg is getting involved, it's making me nervous.
Oh, no.
Right.
The Republic will survive. I'm not really worried about that. I mean, think about it. Some of our earlier presidents, Jackson, went down and beat a man on the floor. Would get into.
That is true.
He would shoot other.
Yeah, but there wasn't YouTube back then.
They would have duels on this because.
Yeah, but a farmer in Oklahoma didn't know that was going on.
Yeah, but because somebody would accuse his wife of being married when she met him, et cetera, and he'd go out and challenge this guy to a duel. And then you've got Hamilton, who's on the $10 bill, getting in duels.
I think that might be better for this election.
Yeah. Well, politics have always been dirty. And
survived Nixon and survived Kennedy getting assassinated. I mean,
remember Nixon? Yeah.
I did. That was a little before my time, but I mean, obviously I've read about it. But I mean, it survived that.
But my favorite president, who Craig probably knows, George Washington, set the precedent by... He's the Cincinnatus of America because he had absolute authority, power, everything. He could have become the king of America, and he stepped away from power, which surprised the heck out of King George in England, and said, that is a great man that can do that. And, he set the standard.
You never hear him say low energy Jefferson or... Yeah, you just
there is an off quote, and they don't actually say low energy. He said that slow guy over there,
Crooked Franklin.
Crooked Franklin, that baker.
So that's notorious.
Ponzi scheme Hamilton.
Notorious RBG versus Colin Kaepernick. First Amendment protects both of their rights to say these things, whether or not it's appropriate or arrogant or stupid on either side. The law basically doesn't take a stance. That's a beautiful thing about our Constitution. And I think that's interesting to talk about. So let's segue into something a little bit more important. A little girl named Natalie Giorgi, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. She was at a Camp Sacramento up at Lake Tahoe, and she was there with her family. And her parents made very clear, which is important because they put the camp on notice in writing and verbally, that she is deathly allergic to peanuts. And so they were at the camp, and apparently they gave some Rice Krispie treats, but what they didn't check was in the marshmallows, there was a peanut ingredient.
Right, in the Rice Krispie treat.
In the Rice Krispie treat. So she ate that, went into immediate anaphylactic shock. Her father, who is a urological surgeon, was there and twice injected her with epinephrine, and to no effect, and then broke in, I think, to the nurse's medicine locker, and then got another one to no effect, and tragically she died right there in front of her parents. So as a result of the Camp Sacramento being put on notice, and the fact that they were the active participant in providing the food, so they had a duty once they're on notice to make sure there's no peanuts in it. They didn't do that, so they were sued for wrongful death, and then they were also sued, I would imagine, for a personal injury because the father, who's a urological surgeon, severed a tendon in his dominant arm in an attempt to revive his daughter, and as a result, he could no longer practice surgery anymore, which is big. So the settlement was for $15 million, and it's a pretty big number. So I was looking at trying to figure out how do you get $15 million in a wrongful death case, because the only way you're ever going to be fully compensated in a death case is by a magic wand that you win, and you get to wave that and bring your daughter back. There's no amount of money on the planet that's ever going to make you whole. I don't care, but the imperfect remedy of money is all we have. So when you're dealing with a young child like this, there's no lost income unless they're on Nickelodeon or what have you. So basically what you have is the loss of love, comfort, and support. Support doesn't exist because they're not earning any money. So it's basically a general damages, pain and suffering type of experience based upon the relationship between the daughter and the parents. It's obviously pretty clear that they're very